Hello and welcome to Let's H. I'm your host, Ushcho. Scroll down and click on Read More in the blurb, follow some of the links. Consider becoming a patron on Patreon to support quality content. I've demonetized all my videos at YouTube, so Patreon is the best way to show your support if you like what I do. Thanks! Today I'm here to talk about an issue that is very close to me. Throughout pretty much all of my independent creative career, I have worked in things that are intended for mature audiences. And of course, every time I say that, I have to say, no, I don't mean porn. I would like to get it out of the way by saying I don't think there's anything wrong with porn. Pornography is something that is very much an essential part of any sort of creative media. Any sort of society, any sort of culture, they're going to have pornography. They've always had pornography. They're always going to have pornography. There's nothing wrong with it. However, the way society is now, people tend to misuse the term and misunderstand it. A lot of people just don't know what it actually means, and as a result, there's a lot of things that are assumed about it, and about anything for adults, or primarily for adults, and it gets a little bit messy. It also gets a little censorship happy, and you know I hate censorship. I'm not there for it. There are so many of these places with terms of service which I call Me Too terms of service because essentially they just copy and paste them from another site without thinking about whether or not they're actually legal, whether or not they're actually enforceable, and whether or not they're actually applying the terms correctly. So I'm going to tell you how to recognize pornography and what sets it apart from things that are just for mainly adult audiences or adult content. Pornography is something that is created for the primary purpose of titillation. It can have artistic merit to it, but it doesn't have to. The intent behind pornography is to arouse the viewer. Pornography tends to be sexual in nature. That's sort of its operating purpose. Now we differentiate this from, say, erotica, because erotica is not pornography. Erotica, while its main purpose may be indeed to arouse its reader or viewer, also has to tell a story. There is artistry in the telling of the story. Similarly, there is artistry in the composition of, say, a comic book or a webcomic whose primary purpose is erotica. Just because something is sensual or erotic or sexual does not make it pornographic. Pornography's central unifying theme is that of sexual interactions designed to arouse the viewer. Anything else is secondary and usually incidental. And yes, you may think of what has been called softcore porn, which is actually, most times, more accurately referred to as erotica, because what is called softcore does have titillating images and scenes, but it is not explicit, and its primary purpose is not the arousal of the audience. It has to tell a story to frame its sensual imagery, and it has to present a context for that imagery. Pornography has no such obligation, and it's important to note, something that a lot of people get wrong is that nudity does not have to be in any way sexual. This is unfortunately a controversial thing, but this is actually a big legal precedent from the 1960s, which paved the way for nudity in film again. Nudity in and of itself is not a sexual thing. Including nudity does not necessarily, in and of itself, define something as pornographic. In fact, it almost never does. The implication of a sexual act does not define something as pornography. Even an explicit sexual act does not define something as pornography. You can usually set it apart by asking a few simple questions. The first is, what was the purpose for which this work was designed? What was it designed to do? Does it incorporate artistry? Is it making an artistic statement? Does it define a context for the interactions that the characters have? Is that context simply a veneer, or is it an attempt to actually define a story and a narrative? Perhaps the most telling thing of all is to ask, if the sexual scenes were removed, would there be anything left? And if there is anything, is it coherent enough to form a narrative on its own? If there is a narrative other than people just having sex, then its status as pornography is debatable. I don't care how good or bad the acting is, or the scripting, or what have you, depending on what medium it is, but pornography is generally created solely for the purpose, or at least heavily primarily for the purpose of titillation. If it offers anything else, it tends to be perfunctory. If there is a significant other content, it is only arguably pornography. Don't use porn to refer to something that contains just nudity or the implication of sex. You wouldn't call, for example, American Horror Story porn, but it does have plenty of nudity, implication of sex, violence, and strong language. Similarly, there are plenty of series like HBO's Rome, Netflix's Sense8, and plenty more that have full frontal, not to mention other topics that are really very much intended for adult or mature audiences. This doesn't make them pornography. The inclusion of images in erotica does not constitute pornography. Being an elitist about one medium mingling with another does not mean you're right about calling something pornographic. Honestly, even explicit arousal, which is much easier to see in males than just about anybody else, is not a sign of erotic content. Because some people are uncomfortable with the male form, they tend to knee-jerk to market pornography or obscene or we don't need this sort of thing. Well, why not? Are you threatened by it? Is that what it is? Because that's what it is for a lot of people. And unfortunately, we're still dealing with a lot of insecurity, especially regarding the body and especially regarding anything that could possibly, potentially be seen as sexual. My advice is deal with your insecurities somewhere you're not oppressing someone or suppressing someone in their artistic and creative expression. Stop assuming that just because something contains nudity, sex, sensuality, or even just something that appeals to you, that it's somehow porn. There's nothing wrong with porn, but it's a very easy thing to delineate from everything else. When the lines start to get blurred, maybe that's a sign that you should stop being so uptight about it. It's not going anywhere. You'll never get rid of it. It's always existed and it will always exist. But if you're going to try and push that on people, if you're going to try and impress upon them your standards and your thoughts about something, then fine. Have the decency, though, to go by the standards that have already been defined legally for you, and stop trying to create things by pulling them out of your own ass, arbitrarily applying them to your terms and services, and in essence, treating anybody that's willing to cultivate an adult audience, and not just dumb it down to everybody and all audiences, like a barge of medical waste. It's not okay. It's not okay to promote that. And in my opinion, by using the word porn so lightly and confusing people about what porn actually is, only helps people that want to do that. So please, if I could ask you sincerely, don't casually throw the word porn around. Don't label something as pornographic just because it has nudity in it. It's not. Don't assume something is pornographic just because it has an honest way of dealing with sex. Ask yourself the questions and think about the answers. And perhaps above all, think about the fact that not everybody finds the same things interesting, exciting, arousing, or even acceptable. People need to be free to express themselves in any way that they feel helps them to realize their creative vision, even if something isn't for us. Being a good person and being a good creator is about helping people to realize what they need to express creatively. Even if we can't or don't want to encourage them to create something that we can't really back up, we can at least not stand in their way to make a statement that may be necessary to say. Just because we don't have to think about it, or maybe we've already worked through that part in our life, or we've answered that question for ourselves, doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be asked, because most people haven't. In most cases, most people haven't even thought about the things that sometimes we think about. Everybody needs the chance and the opportunity to have that in their lives, and if we shut down the creative expression to share that with others, to cause those questions to occur in their heads, to help them through those questions, and to help them examine the things about themselves that perhaps they're not secure about, perhaps they're not confident in, perhaps they think they're alone in. It needs to happen. If we can help that, it needs to happen. We solve nothing and help nothing by shutting people down all the time and by conflating things that others use and misuse and misapply in order to further their agendas of censorship, oppression, and silence, which is the true killer of any community not in the mainstream, of any social label, of any group where people could come together in solidarity and the confidence that they are not alone. That is a very powerful thing. So please don't forget that. And I hope this has been very helpful to you. Again, if you like what I do, please support me on Patreon. As I've mentioned during this, there's a lot of prejudice and a lot of discrimination against anybody that's willing to actually cultivate an adult audience, or a primarily adult audience. Even if all you do incorporates some mature elements, like acknowledging the fact that the characters have sex, or acknowledging the fact that they have a sexuality, acknowledging the fact that sometimes unpleasant things may happen, or violent things may happen, or just because something's illegal doesn't make it wrong, or vice versa. We face this kind of oppression every day, and it's very important, in my mind, to support those who are willing to take that step and say, we need to express this, and who are brave enough to do it, whether or not the culture around them and the society surrounding them accepts it. I'll see you next time. You're welcome. Bye.